Okay, so if you're all ready, we'll get started. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the CDTC New Visions virtual learning series. This is a monthly webinar series that began about 1 year ago, and today we're going to talk about the Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP, and how it works. So just some guidelines for this webinar. Your mics are muted. You can see us, but we cannot see you. If you have a question or comment for any of the panelists, we ask that you use the chat or the Q&A window, and we'll be watching that. If at the end during questions and discussion, you have a question or comment that you can't quite communicate by typing and you'd like to be unmuted, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. And just as a reminder, today there is 1 credit available for AICP planners. And if you are a planning or a zoning board member and your local government has approved CDTC webinars, today's webinar should also count towards credits that you are required to maintain for that. The next webinar in the virtual series is November 16th, and we will have a panel of speakers who will talk about generic environmental impact statements and how they're being used as transportation planning tools throughout the capital region. And then there will also be a webinar December 21st. The previous New Visions webinars are all on our website. They've been recorded and they are uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can watch them all there. So like I said, they're all available there, as well as other meetings and important information from CDTC can all be found on our website or on the CDTC YouTube channel. So today's agenda, we're going to do a brief introduction and overview of New Visions 2050. Then we're going to move to a presentation from Bob Bryce and Greg Wickshire from the New York State Department of Transportation, and they're going to do an overview of the federal aid process. And then Jacob Beeman from CDTC staff will talk about CDTC's programming process and what happens after your project gets on the TIP. And we'll wrap it up with questions and discussion. So again, if you have questions or anything, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So most of you are probably already familiar with the Capital District Transportation Committee, but if you're not, the CDTC is a metropolitan planning organization for New York's capital region, and a metropolitan planning organization, or an MPO, is a transportation policy making and planning organization that allocates federal transportation funding resources to local transportation infrastructure projects and planning programs. So as you can see, our region consists of Albany, Rensselaer, Schenectady County, and Saratoga County, excluding South Glens Falls and the town of Moreau, as well as our transportation planning agencies and partners like the DOT, CDTA, the Regional Planning Commission, the airport, the port, and the Thruway Authority. As an MPO, we lay out planning and investment principles which influence our planning initiatives and what programs we decide to fund. The key products or functions of the MPO are developing the long-range transportation plan, which we refer to as New Visions 2050, developing the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, which we're going to talk about today, and developing a unified planning work program, which contains all the MPO activities and task budgets. And the planning principles, the strategies, the philosophy and approach to planning that are outlined in the long-range plan all influence the TIP and the UPWP. We implement New Visions 2050 through the TIP and through the UPWP. So in general, New Visions 2050 is a blueprint for the regional transportation system. It's a 30-year plan that guides prioritization and funding of investment decisions, and it was developed collaboratively with our transportation providers and planning agencies, as well as with the public and some private sector stakeholders. If you're wondering what's in the plan, we encourage folks to read the executive summary, but there are several components in addition to the summary. There are 11 separate technical area papers. There's a financial plan and a glossary, and all of these can be found on the CDTC website. And earlier we mentioned our planning and investment principles that influence the TIP and influence our UPWP. These are our 15 planning and investment principles, which are really the centerpiece of the plan. They're directly related to criteria we use to evaluate project proposals, and they influence really all the types of tasks and initiatives that are carried out at CDTC. The major policies and best practices proposed in New Visions include maintaining a state of good repair of the entire transportation system, managing congestion, implementing complete streets, implementing transit-oriented development or smart growth, access management, implementing safe systems, revision 0 policies, complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and expanding public participation in the transportation planning process. So what is the TIP? It is a 5-year capital plan for federal transportation funding, and for CDTC, this is about $60 to $65 million per year, including all state and local projects. And like we mentioned, it must reflect the goals and priorities in the long range plan. Our plan is New Visions 2050 and contribute to achieving federal and regional performance targets. All local governments, public entities, the New York State Department of Transportation, the Transit Authority can apply and propose projects for the TIP. And CDTC's philosophy towards the TIP is to develop what we consider a balanced program that contributes to the implementation of the New Visions plan and meets both the letter of federal regulations and also and by allowing CDTC to look at the array of projects and their relative merit and to establish a program that best implements the range of goals included in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is a multimodal, holistic approach to transportation planning in the region. So one of the ways that we make sure that we are on the right track and programming funds that are consistent with public support and demand, as well as our needs, as we do public outreach and we poll the public. This is from our recent New Visions plan. We did public engagement and did a poll on how people would like to see funds programmed in the region. And as you can see, repairs or maintaining the system is the most important priority, but there's also a lot of support for investing in other modes and making that incremental progress and creating a connected and multimodal system that we outline in the New Visions 2050 plan. So when we're evaluating TIP project proposals, it goes through a 2-part process at CDTC. There's a quantitative benefit cost ratio process and a qualitative process. And that qualitative process is which is directly related to the planning and investment principles. And the objective of our methodology, again, is to provide that direct link between New Visions and the TIP, to provide an easily adjustable evaluation system if our New Vision's priorities change. So our evaluation system is built around the different New Vision's principles and criteria, but as we update our long-range plan, if that changes, we can also change our evaluation criteria. It also attempts to quantify the non-quantifiable project benefits that are not included in the benefit cost ratio, like improved livability, mobility, security, and it provides an explicit, objective, transparent, and easily understood evaluation that better reflects the project value. And our process also incentivizes beneficial project features in project scope. So it encourages our local planners and engineers to really think about how they can help implement New Visions through their resurfacing project or through their intersection project. How are they going to make that project meet more of our regional goals? So I'm not going to go into detail about the benefit cost ratio, but this is what goes into our BC ratio. And there are different equations and models that are used to determine these. And then the qualitative evaluation, it uses those 11 categories, which are all based on different goals and the principles in New Visions. And it's the qualitative score is scaled and combined with the benefit cost ratio, determine a final project score. And this merit score sheet assists with prioritizing and ranking projects. It's just a tool used in programming. The score is not the end all be all of a project, but it is a very helpful tool. And this is just more the in detail part of our evaluation, how that freight category is really looked at and how we assign points. So some previous long-range plan accomplishments, we want to show you that we are moving New Visions forward, that we have been moving New Visions forward. We've seen many regionally significant projects implemented or currently being constructed that were all proposed or documented in New Visions, the most recent New Visions, but also previous New Visions. So the expanding bus rapid transit system, the Albany County Rail Trail, the things like the Albany Skyway, which are products of the Hudson River Corridor Study, the Cows Corners Roundabout Project, the Exit 3 Airport Connector, and then a range of other bridge and trail and road resurfacing projects. So we currently have a tip solicitation out. There was a workshop September 24th, and if you are looking for more details on the application process and the information that's required to submit a proposal, these can all be found on the CDTC website. But proposals, the project proposal date has been extended to December 3rd. And we anticipate having an approved tip by June 2022. And all of the solicitation materials can be found at www.cdtcmpo.org/2022 tip. So with that, I am actually going to hand it over to Bob and Greg.
Afternoon. While I share my screen here, let's see, PowerPoint. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess I'll let Bob start off here. Introduce.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. We really appreciate the opportunity. Good afternoon. It's a good forum to have a dialogue regarding the TIP and project funding in general, from at least like to offer a viewpoint from the DOT perspective, and with the multitude of lane miles and infrastructure and certainly the highest portion of users of the system on here, sort of some of the thought processes that go into the project development. I said we'll offer a few slides and then on these precepts, and then hopefully answer some questions and then have a dialogue. Greg.
Yeah. So, button, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, again, good afternoon, everybody. Region 1 consists of 8 counties, from basically down in Greene County up to Lake Placid and Essex County. And to that end, CDTC represents one of 14 MPOs across the state, but one of 2 MPOs in Region 1. And then Region 1 also manages 2 rural counties, which are outside of any MPO, which are Essex and Greene County. So that's how this region's set up. Then to get to the how federal aid works. Where does federal highway money come from? And obviously, we're all paying attention to the news where an infrastructure bill is being negotiated in Congress. A transportation bill turns into real funding, which is then divvied out to the states per the bill. And then New York State then develops planning targets to hand out to the various MPOs in the rural areas. And then once that's done, then the MPOs construct a respective TIP, which is a 5-year transportation plan for the federal aid. And then the 14 MPOs and the rural counties roll their TIPs up to the STIP, the statewide transportation plan, which is a 4-year document. And then that whole process is then approved by Federal Highway for implementation, generally at the first of a new federal fiscal year, which is always October 1. So like Jen said, we're shooting to have one ready for full implementation next October 1st. So now what is federal aid eligible? There's quite a bit that is eligible, but in general, to start, everyone thinks of highways, it's highway projects. They have to be projects on the federal aid system, which is a major collector or higher. Functional class information can be found both on the DOT website, and I'm pretty sure the CDTC has some references on where major collectors, where to find your functional class, classification of your roadway. Then for bridge projects, really any bridge on a public road is eligible for federal funding, but there are bridges that are off system that I'll get to later when I get more into the fund source descriptions. And then there is some funding available through the federal aid process that is for bicycle and pedestrian projects. The key is it must provide connectivity and be part of a network. It can't just be a touristy trail. It's got to be actually provide some transportation linkage. So then federal funds, there's various colors of money that come out of Congress. I'm going to talk about the most current ones which have been really a part of several recent highway bills, so they don't change that much. Usually, every now and then they overhaul it, but start with NHPP, the National Highway Performance Program. This is for use on the NHS system, which again is a layer of the functional class map. We'll show you what the NHS is comprised of, but it's your interstate, your Route 9, Route 5, Route 20. Those are examples of roads on the NHS. And then the other thing NHPP can be used for is any bridge that's on any federally eligible road. Doesn't have to be on the NHS. That's provided some better flexibility to get after more bridge projects, which is seen as beneficial by a lot of folks. Then there's the Surface Transportation Block Grant set of funds, STBG for short. There's large urban and flex. And flex is comprised of other, I'm not going to get into the details on that, but it's actually comprised of several fund sources that are rolled up into the basic two, large urban and flex. This funding, again, any federally eligible highway or bridge, and then this is the color of money that can be used for your bicycle and ped, connectivity projects. The next one is the off-system category of STBG. This is the color of money that can be used on any existing bridge that isn't eligible for another fund source. The keys here are it must already be a bridge. It can't be a culvert that's turning into a bridge. And, the other part of this is, unfortunately, it's one of the smallest allocations generally when it's doled out. So it's a competitive fund source, but it is there to get after non-federal aid bridges. The next one is the Highway Safety Improvement Fund Source. It's basically safety funds. This is a data-driven program that is based on accident rates, but then also what they call a treatable pattern of accidents. And you do an analysis and make sure that your benefit cost ratio is over 1.0 in order to qualify for the HSIP funds. Now, that's not to say that other projects with a safety, an observed safety issue aren't eligible for any funding. They just may not qualify for this fund source. They can be part of another safety problem that doesn't meet this threshold. You can always get after it with the other fund sources on the federal aid system. One thing that's sort of new to HSIP, I say new is relative, it's a couple of years, are systemic treatments that don't need the full analysis to use HSIP. These are some very specific pedestrian upgrades, upgraded countdown timers, intersection treatments to enhance pedestrian safety. And then the other one are what they call cards and shards, which are centerline audible roadway detectors, basically rumble strips down the center of the road, and shards or shoulder rumble strips, which are used in isolated locations. Both are meant to basically alert drivers when they're departing their lane and prevent collisions, either head-on collisions or roadside. Those don't need any analysis to use HSIP. Another fund source that's talked about with some frequency is CMAQ, which is for congestion mitigation and air quality. The Capital District has reached what they call attainment, which basically means we don't get an allocated CMAQ fund source, but the area can still compete in the TAP CMAQ solicitation, which the most recent one just closed. So that's where CMAQ funding comes in. So with that, that's the fund source discussion.
And we thought it was important to at least have a quick discussion around the fundamental link between transportation systems and land use, and in particular the fact that New York State is fundamentally a home rule state, especially when it relates to land use decisions. And essentially what that means is if there's 100 foot of frontage on a particular state highway, if the municipality decides to break it up into 20-foot frontages, that we need to accommodate 5 driveways onto that property, unless the site has access to another public road, either behind it or along the side of it there. So it's, we had mentioned that some of the fund sources are related to the functional class, but it's actually the functional class is directly driven by the land use of the road itself. So, the term collector literally comes from, the density of the land use that is along that roadway. So that all sort of ties back to the funding and the amount of available funding, and why it becomes a regular subject matter is because fundamentally DOT and the regional offices in particular are in the preservation business and the asset management sort of business, life cycle repairs, preservation treatments, bridge rehabilitation work, and have the discretion based on those criteria to program things. So when projects are proposed that are broader in scope along a particular corridor, that's where the partnership and the relationship with the municipality, either via supporting projects to the TIP or some of the statewide solicitations, becomes critical. You see at the at the MPO table, of which at that forum, I mean, DOT just represents one vote around the table at both the planning and policy committees, and the majority of projects that we propose are preservation in nature. So even when the state highway may be Main Street in a municipality, the idea to do a proposed scope of work beyond a preservation treatment requires a partnership with the municipality.
Yeah, and there's several examples of this across the area, across the CDTC area, where local sponsors have brought forward a project to get after something identified in their own local long-range plan that does get after addressing the development that they've undertaken through the use of their mitigation fees that cover the match of the funds sometimes, or their complete streets plans, their bike ped network, or other components of a local comprehensive plan that is transportation related on, as Bob said, on a main street that happens to be a state highway. So we do encourage sponsors to apply for projects that get after their priorities. One interesting thing unique to this tip cycle that we're going to try out is if a municipality wants to do sidewalk upgrades on a state route, that we can help with the match on the sidewalk portion of a project to help get after our collective ADA transition plans. That's something we're going to try this tip cycle, see if we get any subscription to it. So the example here is Route 4 over in North Greenbush, where they got some federal funding to do numerous improvements along the corridor. And other examples are 9W Fairbush roundabout over in Bethlehem. Guilderland is putting some sidewalks along Route 20 out in their neck of the woods. And the Delaware Ave Road Diet is another example of a local bringing a project forward on our system. Again, it's meeting their needs. So,
and even though we're listing transportation type projects there, I mean, we've had several successful partner relationships that sometimes the municipality may have road work. Road work. They may have sewer or water system work or upgrades, or a sidewalk project, something outside of the curb line, and we've been able to partner, even if it's the preservation piece for the road work that we can bring to the table, to partner with a fund source that may not necessarily be under the umbrella of the transportation funding. It may have been secured by another agency or grant program.
Yeah, no, thanks. Good point. So say you get your project programmed, you apply to the tip, you get it on the tip. What's next? What do you do? What now? We work with the locals to develop what the first step is, to start what's called the state local agreement, SLA for short. And I recommend to everybody to start early. If you see your project on the horizon, get started early on the state local agreement, because it first has to go through the respective municipalities process to get resolutions passed, to authorize your supervisor or mayor to sign it. And then it comes back to DOT and then still has to navigate other state agencies, including the Attorney General and the Comptroller's Office, to fully execute the agreement. So that's how you start a project, and that is generally measured in a timeline of months. Could be 2, could be 6. Sometimes it depends on municipal rules that they have to navigate to get them signed. So then the next thing up is, I'm going to say 99% of projects are designed by a consultant who helps manage the project. And, actually, I'll let Bob speak to this a little better.
You know, like Greg mentioned, the majority, there are a few larger municipalities that have designed their projects in-house, but for the most part, they have, the sponsors have sought out consultant services. And, you know, the important elements to remember, I mean, it does need to be a competitive solicitation. So there are resources available. You know, you could do a straight up request for proposal, an RFP here, if it goes in the New York State Contract Reporter, and you could use basically the entire spectrum of consultant firms that are out there with that sort of proposal. Our friends at the County Highway Superintendents Association, the statewide association, have developed what they've called the local design service agreements. Basically, they've pre-qualified, I think there are 14 firms on the current pre-qualified list. So it could be narrowed down, and each of those firms have a history in delivering federal aid projects. So sometimes that's helped. It reduces the municipal effort. Basically, an interest survey goes out to those, and they'll bring the proposals into the sponsor. Here in our office, our Region 1, the DOT Region 1 Local Program Liaison, Lorenzo DiStefano, his number is there, always available for support to any of the municipalities. Anytime there's a statewide solicitation or even a new round of tip update, we'll generally have some sort of either webinar or training to get folks started with a fuller version of the steps involved. And the last piece on DOT for reference material, the procedure for locally administered federal aid projects, PLA FAP, is also available on the website, which is a tremendous reference document.
Yeah. So the next one I was just going to hit on, this is an example of a federal authorization, which is the piece of paper you need to start a project before you incur any costs. It's just part of the federal aid process. And to start design, don't have your consultant actually start billable hours until you have the federal authorization in hand, which is also obtained through our office and provided to the, generally, I think we provide it straight to the consultants as a project manager, but we also send it to the sponsors. Very important to get this before each phase of your project begins. If you have, design, get it before design right away, and lastly, construction. So, in the basic guidance, I mean, there's a lot of federal regulations, as we all know. Very briefly, really, federal highways only enforcement is really withholding money if there's a problem, and this is why we recommend the use of the consultants that are out there that know this process, because they're very good at navigating all the regulations and pitfalls of really avoiding the pitfall, I should say, in getting a project from design to construction. The biggest topic, really, I would say, is the overarching environmental documentation that needs to be done to get your project to design approval and then into construction. You'll hear the term NEPA for short. That's the umbrella that all projects must follow with federal aid. So that's really the most important thing. Another thing to mention, just for reference, is once you start a project, once you have your design authorization, you need to either obtain right-of-way or construction within 10 years, and otherwise, and then once you have right-of-way, if you purchase right-of-way as part of your project, you have now a 20-year clock to get construction. These are the two thresholds that FHWA sets, and they seem really long, but there are every now and then a project that runs into generally an environmental mitigation issue that causes a project to languish and hit this 10-year clock. This is where a sponsor could be asked to repay all the design costs incurred up to that point in time. And then there are reasons for extensions, but they need to, there's a process to apply for extensions from the FHWA, but it's never a guarantee. So, and of course, our friends at Federal Highway like to point out the section of the code that points all this out, but you don't need to memorize those codes. The other thing is, this is federal aid is a reimbursement program, not a grant program. So, you know, I mentioned about the authorization to proceed. Then the contractor or consultant does their respective work. The local sponsor pays the contractor, then submits those bills to DOT to reimburse the local. And when we pay the local, we then submit the bill to FHWA, and then FHWA reimburses us. So this is the way the process goes for the reimbursements. Just like to point that out too, to really highlight that a local sponsor needs to have the ability to finance their entire project in the anticipation of reimbursement of the 80 or 90% federal aid that they'll get back. Speaking of reimbursements, for those that aren't familiar with the statewide financial system, DOT is in the transition process to SFS. We've actually officially transferred over to SFS, but the process is sort of not totally caught up yet, as the statewide financial system is intended for local sponsors to submit their own bills into the system. And then in parallel, send it to DOT so that we can help approve the payment requests as they come in. Currently, the invoices or payment requests are still coming to DOT, and we're working in conjunction with local sponsors to submit them. But very soon, we're anticipating around January that the submissions are going to go directly into the statewide financial system. So stay tuned for training. It comes in the format of a notice to vendor that will be sent out to all municipalities again to ask for folks that want to train. There is one thing though, DOT is one of the last agencies into the statewide financial system, and therefore each respective municipality may have someone familiar with the system already due to dealing with other agencies for other programs. So it may not be as of a learning curve as one would think. To that end, I provided some links here within our presentation, which I also shared back with CDTC. So, you know, you can write to any of us and we can send you this presentation, and the links should work just by clicking on them. So to that, I guess I'm going to see if there's any questions out there.
Thanks, Greg. Actually, if you guys can stick around till after Jacob's presentation, we'll do Q&A then.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, so Jacob is going to take it from here.
So I can share my screen. And just making sure everyone sees my presentation.
Yep, it's all good.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Jen. So I'm going to kind of walk through the same process that Greg just did, but kind of from our perspective. So first, I mean, just like a real high level overview of if you're a sponsor looking to get a project funded through the TIP. Number one, project needs to be eligible. So Greg kind of started touching on this with all of the different fund sources and the plethora of different kind of eligibility for each one of those fund sources. So we have a lot of documentation on that on our website right now. On the current TIP solicitation page. So if you are interested in putting a project in, you know, first and foremost, you know, I would suggest going through those eligibility requirements in detail and kind of taking a look at each of those fund sources, because depending on the fund source in your project, that could affect the eligibility. So once you know that your project is going to be eligible, and you know, you go through the application process and submit that to CDTC. The project will then go through a number of different qualitative and quantitative evaluations that Jen kind of talked about earlier with our merit score evaluations, as well as our benefit cost evaluations. And that's really kind of the meat and potatoes of what CDTC staff does to evaluate each project on the TIP. Those evaluations help compare it to new visions as well as federal and regional performance measures, and really help us kind of compare those projects against each other. Kind of along that same thread, the next bullet, project helps achieve a balanced program and implements New Visions 2050. So, you know, if you are scoring well on those project evaluations, that likely means that that project is supporting New Vision's goals and objectives, which is what we always want to see here at CDTC, and definitely would come into play during the programming portion at the CDTC table. And that brings us to the final bullet point, where the project would inevitably be selected to be included in the draft TIP by the CDTC Planning Committee. And you know, I'll kind of drive that point home a couple more times in this in the next few slides, is that all projects selected for the TIP are ultimately decided on by the Planning Committee and Policy Board. And really all of the evaluation and scoring and ranking that's done in the meantime is really just for information purposes and to help our members really know all of the benefits and elements of each candidate project. So again, to go through the process in a little bit more detail, and you know, ideally these steps would occur in order, but they do not necessarily need to happen in the order that we're presenting them here, and I'll kind of touch on that quickly. So number one, DOT in coordination with the MPOs determines federal funding for each DOT region. And Greg kind of touched on that, the larger region 1 compared to our smaller MPO region. And from there, DOT regional staff coordinates with the MPO to determine the funding needed for existing projects on the TIP and regional set-asides. So since there's typically an overlap of the current TIP and the TIP that we, you know, the future TIP, the TIP that we're going to be soliciting projects for, there's always going to be carryover of a number of projects from the current to the future TIP. So to make sure that we have enough funding available to fund those projects, we need to kind of coordinate and make sure that we know what needs to be set aside for those funding before we could determine the overall funding that's going to be available to program new projects. Once that dollar amount is determined, the planning committee then approves that amount by year and by fund source, so that we all know exactly which projects can be programmed and in which year and by which fund source. So it's not only the overall number, it's broken down by fund source and year as well. And then so step 3, depending on the fund balance, assuming that there will be money for new projects, CDTC sends out letters and announces a solicitation as a call for new candidate projects. And so I'll mention, as I kind of stated before, this is one of those cases where this process isn't necessarily taking place in order. Right now, we have an ongoing solicitation, and we've sent out letters requesting new candidate projects to all of our members. However, just due to uncertainties at the federal level and state level, we don't have 1 and 2 determined yet, but we do have, we do anticipate that there will be some funding available for new projects. So to give ourselves time to fully evaluate, we send out those, that call for projects. Step 4, once we've received project applications from all of our sponsors, CDTC does kind of an internal review and make sure that there's all of the data that we need to complete our evaluations in all of those projects. So there may be a little bit of back and forth between staff and the sponsors, just to clarify things that we might pick out of the applications and make sure that we have everything that we need. From there, each candidate project goes through a very thorough evaluation based on those quantitative and qualitative benefits that Jen mentioned earlier. This is really an all hands on deck process within CDTC. All staff is involved, takes anywhere 4 to 6 weeks. And this is really kind of that basis on which we're able to compare all projects against each other. It takes into account our new visions, goals, and objectives. As I mentioned before, our federal and regional performance measures as well. And so really this evaluation by CDTC staff is what allows us to rank these projects and give that information back to our members so that they can make the best decisions possible on which projects ultimately get programmed. From there, the planning committee reviews a number of different output documents that that we provide after all evaluations are done, and I'll talk about those in the next slide. So the planning committee reviews all the candidate projects, and then from there programs by year and by fund source for the new tip in real time at a planning committee meeting. So again, want to point out that all final decisions are made by our members at the table during a planning committee meeting. So just mention quickly the documents that we typically provide for our members. So, you know, we do that thorough evaluation, and you know, we want to make sure that we get all of that data that we collect and analyze and are able to distribute it back out to our members so that they have a good idea of what all of the projects that we received are, what their benefits are, what the costs are, and really what they bring to the table. So not only do we compile and provide these to, you know, the sponsors who submitted their projects, but these are for the public to see and for all of our members to see and evaluate as well. So we really kind of combine this into two main documents. The first is our project fact sheet, which is the document on top. So the project fact sheet is one fact sheet per candidate project, and includes all of the major details that of the project, project name, location, eligible fund sources, the project priority of the sponsor. So that's whether, if they've submitted multiple projects, that's the rank that they give the project, kind of internal to their own projects that they've submitted. We include a project map, as well as all of the benefits and costs, and merit evaluation breakdown as well. So that is the document that provides the most detail. And then the second kind of piece is the summary tables. So for each project type, we will compile a summary table that has all of the projects within that category. And that kind of is done to allow everyone to kind of see all the projects that are going to be competing against each other in one place. And it's a quick reference to kind of move down the list and see, all of the details on all the pavement projects at once, all of the bridge projects at once, bike and ped, and so on. So again, we provide these to the planning committee members well in advance of the final meeting that the programming will be done, and is really, these are the kind of the final documentation of all of the projects that we'll receive during a particular solicitation, and meant to highlight all the details. So public review, once we've distributed those the summary documents, and planning committee has programmed projects, again, by fund source and by year, in real time at a planning committee meeting. At that point, the TIP is still considered draft. So really, it's a list of funded projects for the capital program, but it still needs to go through a public review process, and then get wrapped up into the final TIP document as well, before it can finally be approved by our policy board and considered a final TIP. So, if we're taking our existing TIP solicitation as a guide, we expect to have a draft TIP listings approved by policy board in March, followed by a 60-day public comment period, which we'll distribute those the project listings as well as the TIP document through our website, social media, at local libraries, a number of different ways. And we hope to hold at least one public workshop to discuss the projects that have made them their way onto the draft TIP before the final TIP listings and full TIP document will be approved by the policy board in June of 2022. And as Greg mentioned earlier, at that point, the document will truly take over in October of 2022, once it's been approved at the federal level. So if your project gets funded, what next? And Greg kind of covered this in more detail because, as you'll see here, in a perfect world, or if your project goes as smoothly as planned, CDTC is kind of hands-off once the project is funded. The majority of the project is going to be managed between the project sponsor and New York State DOT. Really, CDTC staff is only brought in to ensure that information provided on the TIP and STIP remains consistent with the actual project throughout the life of the project. So when there's changes, that's when we need to be brought in to make sure that those changes are approved and make their way onto the official TIP document. If those changes are not brought into the TIP, that could jeopardize the authorization of federal funding. So those changes need to be made before your money will be made available for any particular phase if it does not align. So overall changes to the TIP, if there is a change that needs to be made, we request that the sponsor reaches out directly to us, whether comes from the sponsor or a project consultant, it doesn't really matter. But overall, CDTC only reaches out to sponsors for information on average about once a year. So, anytime that that there's going to be a change being made to your project, we always appreciate you reaching out to us first, and the earlier the better. So once a CDTC has been notified of a change, we'll work with the sponsor to determine kind of what the type of approval will be needed based on that change. And typically there's two different categories. The first being a project selection change, which is really, we'll call it a minimal change to the project, potentially something like just a change in schedule. And these types of changes can be done without the approval of planning committee or policy board. So typically those are, they can be done in a shorter amount of time. As long as we have the information that we need, we can make that change to allow for the federal authorization of funding. In the scenario where there's a larger change, such as a big budget change or a major scope change to the project, those types of changes will require a TIP amendment. And again, depending on even the level of that change, that could require planning committee approval and or in addition to that, policy board approval as well. So over the years, CDTC has developed a pretty detailed list of criteria as to what types of changes require which approval. And we do have these posted on our TIP website. So as you go through managing a project, it would definitely be good to review these, have them on hand. I do think a lot of the consultants probably are aware of these, but still might not be a bad idea to make them aware of these guidelines as well. Because ultimately we always want to make the note that the sponsor should be aware that these changes could take time, and depending on the level of approval, whether that be planning committee or policy board, it could be a few months before that change is actually approved and can be made. So it's always just something to keep in mind that if there is a change that needs to be made on the TIP, it may not happen overnight. So always keep in mind these guidelines. In addition to that, CDTC does do a project tracking program. So I mentioned earlier that if you don't reach out to us, it's likely that we're only going to contact you once a year, and that's through this program. So a few years ago, we started this project delivery and tracking program where we reach out to about 3 or 4 project sponsors each month and provide them with a template that has these 5 simple questions just for an update. Basically, is your project on schedule, on budget? Are there any anticipated amendments? Really any kind of issues that we should know about that could create an amendment in the future. So each month, excuse me, we send this out to, like I said, 3 or 4 project sponsors, collect the information. We usually like to ask one of those 3 project sponsors each month to just provide a brief verbal update to the planning committee. And this is really just to kind of shed some light on some issues that project sponsors could be having. It allows the opportunity to discuss with other sponsors, potentially if they've had the same issues, how did they overcome them? I know in the past we've kind of heard about costs and availability of materials that led to some interesting conversations. So really, this is just kind of a way that we can touch base with all of our project sponsors, get a handle on each and every project on the TIP, and just kind of get an idea of how it's going outside of the amendment process. So, if you do get a project on the TIP, that's kind of the level of coordination that you can expect to see from CDTC. Not a whole lot unless there's an amendment needed. And then, of course, these monthly updates too that we request. And we also document this information on our end, and we're able to use that to help track some other federal and kind of internal project performance measures that we need to keep track of as well. So that is all I have is on the side of the CDTC side of things.
Thank you, Jacob. So I'm just going to run through some quick slides to wrap things up. So we're in the implementation phase of New Vision. So we will continue to announce new webinars as part of the virtual learning series. And if you'd like to request a virtual training through a planning board, zoning board, town board, or city council, please contact us. There are additional training and resources specifically for the TIP on our website. We mentioned them earlier, but I encourage you to visit there if you are looking for guidance on how to fill out the application or what data you need and where to find it. Other CDTC products, which are also are part of implementing New Visions, is our linkage program, the congestion management process, our public participation policy, and other regional plans. We provide planning assistance through linkage and through a technical assistance program that we work on with CDRPC. We have a variety of data resources available for local governments, infrastructure inventories, count data, and other survey and safety information. We also have educational resources and funding resources. TAP, CMAQ, Recreational Trails Program are, currently not accepting new project proposals. We currently have a solicitation for our UPWP out. We're going to do a one-year program budget for 2022. There's a virtual applicant meeting scheduled for this Friday at 1 o'clock. You must register, and you can go to the CDTC website here for more information and guidance on what we're looking for. And then, of course, on our website, you can find other resources that will help you with planning and other tools that we've developed. So with that, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you raise your hand, I can unmute you, or you can use the Q&A at the bottom. We covered a lot of information. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be on the CDTC YouTube channel. So if you miss anything, you can go back and rewatch it again, or if you want to reach out and contact us, we'd be happy to share additional information with you or answer questions. I don't see any questions or anything in the chat or Q&A. There are no hands up. So thank you very much for attending today. And thank you so much to our presenters, Greg and Bob from DOT and Jacob here at CDTC. If you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to contact us. And we hope to see you again next month. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, all.
Thanks, Jen.